Hello, YouTube world, and welcome to another chat with our Animosaurus kind of world that I've got going on here. Today I am very lucky to have in the studio with me an amazing 3D artist, Egan Wesner. Thanks for joining me, Egan.
Hey Kim. Hey everyone on YouTube.
Now we've just come off of three projects back to back together, and we've built this world called Sanctuary City. And the third
Yeah.
movie's just come back, so this is a really great time for us to just sit down and actually talk about our experience within the Sanctuary City world. So after that, let's just wind back to where you were when you first landed. This was like 2 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's just talk
Um,
about how you got into being in a 3D world.
all right. So, like, my first start out was at Liquid Animation after graduating at James E. And then I was there for about 2 years as a junior, got in doing rigging and that sort of stuff. Then I spent some time at Cutting Edge, working with Rangi, who I believe you've had on your channel as well. And then I went into more of a VFX sort of generalist role there. Um, Sadly, the long form department closed down, and I saw a job going for like a photon. It was actually Rob, one of my supervisors from Liquid, that suggested I should go along for the interview. And yeah, I sat down with Rickard and Ryan, and yeah, they loved my demeanor and my attitude, and they were like, yeah, let's bring you on. I didn't actually have a show reel at the time, which anyone starting out in the industry, you got to have a show reel. But I was very lucky that I had a lot of people saying good things about me to get me the role. Yeah.
So with that role when you started off, were you just being brought on as a environment modeler? Was that what you were started off as?
Yes, yeah. I started off as I think the role was a senior environment artist.
Cool.
Yeah, that's the expectation was that I was supposed to be overseeing a couple of other artists, obviously being supervised by another individual who was the asset lead, and yeah, basically just helping out a couple of juniors and a couple of mid artists into sort of realizing this crazy, wacky world that the guys at Like a Photon had come up with.
Yeah. So with the start, because I before I started, I heard that the studio was not always the nice open studio which I walked into. Did you get to see the previous studio?
No, I did hear many war stories from my supervisor Rob. He said that they were in a tiny little room. At one point in time, they had to share a Wi-Fi dongle, or sorry, like a 3G mobile internet dongle over laptops in a tiny little room with poor ventilation and no windows. But I got there just as they were still sort of setting up the desks, and there was nothing hanging on the walls. No, there was a bit of paint going up here and there. So, yeah, definitely early days sort of stuff. It was very interesting to see a startup of a company.
Yeah, I mean that was one thing. For everyone who doesn't know this particular job role, it was the studio was set up in what is termed inside Brisbane the industrial area. So all of a sudden there's this. It was a really weird experience when you rock up to an animation studio when yet next to us was a truck maintenance spot, and across the road there was a tire shop, and yet there's this animation studio on top of a house how, what were they? They were a building
Dick,
construction
Dixon
place.
Homes, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I have fond memories of watching the panda mascot for the truck tire place across the road, dancing with one of those signs, spruiking the business. Yeah, yeah. It's very very odd place to be
Yeah.
when we're talking animation, because obviously a lot of studios and most of the studios I worked at were all in a city or West End or anything else like that, and yeah, to be out in the industrial area was weird, and it was difficult to get to sometimes, but yeah, I think the money that they saved on rent, they got to spend on staff. So
Yeah.
no complaints on that point for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was part of the charm of the place, I think, which brought the crew together, was because you couldn't then just disperse quite quickly because there was really nowhere else to go. There was one cafe downstairs, and then there was another pizza place down the road. But you
Yeah.
couldn't just walk anywhere to get anything. And, artists being artists, we don't all drive around in BMWs or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, so you were there right at the start. So the stories that you kind of get to start off on was you got to bring the team together and start working with the team right from the start.
So they already had the concept artist team and the storyboard team. When I started, they had already brought on Sean, who's one of my friends and one of the another artist there. He's amazing. He'd actually been overseas for a little bit and been out of the 3D game for a while. So he was sort of dusting off some cobwebs. So I was there to sort of help him out in bits and pieces. But to be honest, Sean was just amazing. And then we had, yeah, another artist, Pradeep, start on as well. So overall, the environment team was just 3 people. And yeah, it was basically my job to help coordinate the communication between concept artists and the asset leads and my 3 crew members. That's including myself, obviously. And yeah, really sort of just trying to set the quality and the tone and for how the environments were going to be done, tackling all those sort of problems that crop up, like how are we going to do grass, how's the trees going to look, sort of just doing all that look development, because obviously when you first come onto a project, the concept artist has a very sort of clear direction from the director, and they're communicating that through that, their 2D artwork, and then you've got to kind of decipher all of those discussions and conversations that those two have had, so you're not asking the same questions again, because obviously that's the concept artist's job, is to have that conversation with the director. They sit down, they concept it out, and yeah, sort of like help bring my own sort of artistic expression to the world as well, and my own way to solve certain problems.
Yeah.
It was really, really interesting.
Yeah, because you bring up something really quick, which I guess we want to talk a lot about, is even though this was, you're right at the start of the production, there's not really a big pipeline put in place yet. There's no tested formulas, there's nothing else there. But already, right from the start, you're already solving problems, which I guess is something which you get brought on to really do. Because it was one thing that you really shone at while we were there working together. If I ever had a problem, it's just like, oh, you just hit up Egan, he'll know how to work it out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
I've really sort of prided myself on that, having that aspect no matter where I go, and I try and pass that on to anyone I work with as well. I'm just like, hey, if you can be the problem solver, you'll always be in a job, really. Like, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, because that was one thing, like I was alluding to before, where you started out was definitely not where you ended up. Even throughout the first film where we started off on, as one of the I guess tools that the team put together was to actually then shuffle, key people they wanted to keep on production. They'd actually try to move them along in the production line so you could keep yourself employed and they wouldn't lose you. So that was one thing which you really grabbed onto, I guess, to broaden your skills, was to actually get your hands into pretty much everything.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I was originally only slated to be working on each film 6 months. So 6 months doing all the environments for the first movie, then, so a total of 18 months. And I think I ended up working on those films for about 2.5 years. So from beginning to end. So yeah, I by being diverse, I added an extra year on my employment there. And I thoroughly enjoyed it as well, because I got to throw myself at a bunch of challenges that I hadn't tackled before. But I also got to shine in areas that I'd obviously worked towards throughout my career leading up to that point.
Yeah, because another thing that was which I found, and I cherished within the team that we had there was actually the support to learn. Because everyone who was there, we all knew we were on a really small project, and we were all very ambitious about what we were trying to do, because we were trying to bring together 3 films out of a green studio which had no pipeline or anything in place. So we
Yeah,
we
yeah.
had a fair idea about what we were getting ourselves into, but all the steps along the way, everyone tried to work together to actually get that product through. So
Mm,
especially when when we were getting to the end of the first film, it was exciting to see us all come together and go, oh yes, we're going to have a film released. This is
yeah,
excellent, and
yeah,
it was on
yeah.
time, even better.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, even some of the tech challenges which we had in that first film, when you look back at them now, do you think they were much of a challenge to get through? Like, one of the big ones was crowds, because we didn't know if we were going to get crowds.
Yeah, and I think the like that's it is that if you look at the first movie, so in Wish Mystery, there is I think probably 1 or 2 scenes with some crowds in it. Whereas as opposed to Daisy Quokka, we had an entire stadium full of people that we needed to solve. So like obviously, the crowds wasn't that big of an issue in the first one, but we tried to tackle it in one particular way. But we saw that the way that we tackled it didn't work. So then when it came to making these massive, huge crowds, we were like, okay, we need to really rethink how we're doing this. So and yeah, that was a lot of Rob as well, trying to like just doing some R&D and being able to spend some time on working out the all of those sort of problems.
Yeah, because that was one thing, as we got through the first movie, there was a dot list of things which we were like, okay, this could have been done better, this could have been done better. And as we rolled into the second movie, because this was really tight schedule, we just rolled straight into the second one. There wasn't a lot of R&D time, but I know with our second one, Combat Wombat, it did. All of a sudden, if you look at the difference between the two, there was a lot of things that were tackled to make it look so much better. Like the world within Combat Wombat, I think really shone really well. It looked vibrant, it looked colourful, it looked
Yeah.
full. And I
Hmm.
think the lighting team really nailed, because they were really late on the Wishmas tree and they didn't get much of an input into the pipeline. But if
Yeah.
on the second one, then on Combat Wombat, I think that really shone in that movie.
Well, yeah, like we had a lot of nighttime shots. So, and I think they're probably one of my favorite sets out of the film. Would have to be the alleyway. So just after Maggie and Sweetie meet in the alleyways open, the convenience store, they're walking back towards Maggie's house, and they're just down this sort of like random underneath alleyway, and it's at night, and so I got to put a lot of myself into that sort of set. Like it was kind of we did have concept art and design on it, but it was also just a case of Nathan, our concept artist, was really focusing on like much of the bigger set pieces. So I kind of just had some drawings that they had from when they were doing the Wish Mystery, and a little bit of the stuff from Combat Wombat, and then something from the storyboards. And then I was just asked to just make this area, and it was just supposed to be a little walk and talk. But it ended up for me being one of my favorite sets because there were like neon lights, and there was like the illusion that the city around them was still alive and still going whilst they were, out walking and having this conversation, even though there's not a single other character in that whole scene except for right at the end. Yeah.
Yes, that little lizard right at the end. I can't remember his
Yeah, yeah,
name.
yeah. But so I got to work on that with Pradeep, myself, and Sean. So all three environment artists got to work on that set in different aspects. Um, and yeah, it really shows that we ended up becoming a team, finding where one person's strength was and the other person's downfalls, and we helped one another out and really came to this cohesive look. I feel as though the film for Combat Wombat was very much more a cohesive look, and then even more so into Daisy Quokka.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, yeah, because leading into Daisy Quokka, Daisy Quokka itself, it did, when we went through it, there was a lot more challenges thrown up. different challenges again. It's a lot more physical. The characters are
Hmm.
doing a lot more impact work. We sort of tested that out in Combat Wombat, but I know from an animation perspective, we threw a whole lot more at it and go, okay, let's get these characters doing really crazy things. And yes, not only was the lighting stretched out a lot more, all the playgrounds and everything, the environments they were going to be lava, water.
Hmm.
Let's just
Yeah.
chuck everything in there and see how it went. And it's
Yeah.
just like, oh my
Smoke,
goodness me.
fireworks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. So
Yeah.
from that point of view, it's like, holy hell. How did you go about looking at it, especially Daisy Quokka, right from the start? How confident were you then after going through the first two to go, you know what, we can just pull this off. It'll just be a breeze.
So at the end of Combat Wombat, I think I ended up taking like 2 weeks off because I think at that point I had just worked solid and not taken a single day off. And then so I took 2 weeks off and I came back, and Pradeep and Sean were already working on some of the other sets. And I came in and I just saw this set list. And so I think in the first movie, so Wishmas Tree, I think we had like 20 something sets. And then in Combat Wombat, that went up to like 29. And then I think in Daisy Quokka, we ended up going to like 36. So the number of environments kept going up. The timeline wasn't really compressing, but because we were eating from, we were robbing from Paul to give to Peter in the schedule, we were getting a bit crunched at the end, because at the end of Daisy Quokka, that's when the money ran out. So we had a very fixed timeline to complete everything in. We had the same number of artists, but just more sets. And this time around, the level of detail, just they wanted to amp it up. And even now, I remember coming in and just going, you know what, I really do think that we have this. Like, we can. I definitely knew where we could start cutting corners. Communication between myself and concept artists, and obviously Rika, the director, was amazing. We'd really sort of become this well-oiled machine by that point in time. So the benefit of being able to work with the same team for all three movies, to me, was priceless. Like, and obviously working with layout artists and animators and everything as well, it was really, really good. Like, I kind of just jumped at it with no hesitation.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that kind of shows in the film as well. When you watch them, I recently just sat down and watched them back to back to back, and you can just see that the third one just flows so much more than especially the first one. The first one, you can see it was very tight and very kind of spaced a bit differently. I think Rickard did a great job of bringing the three of them together and tying characters from the first one into the third one and into the second one, which I think was really cool. I think he'd done a great job with that. And
Yeah.
but the team itself just got into a really good flow by the third one, where things were just kind of moving quite well, and it shows on when you watch it. I think it looks good. Do you have a favorite, like you said, the favorite set from Combat Wombat? Did you have a favorite set from Daisy Quokka as well?
Oh, that's a tricky one. Like, I would definitely say there's one set that I'm proud of, but then one that I also just really love. So the one that I'm proud of would probably have to be the Marketplace, purely just because of the sheer size of it. So it ended up having to be broken up into 4 separate sets that you could turn on each individual space as the characters move through, where you could, the camera, the line of sight for the camera could see in those specific areas. So that was just a massive set to tackle. And so I'm really proud that I got to pull it off, and it looks as good as it does. I still see all of the holes in it and the things that are wrong with it, because I didn't get enough time to polish it as much as I wanted to. But the one that just spoke to me and like I had a lot of fun with would probably have to be the First Wish. So that's the first obstacle course that the contestants take on, and it was just smoke and spikes and ropes and falling rocks and traps and totem poles, and it was just a bunch of really fun, cool things that I got to do.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, and them getting through that the first one when they get through, because that's the one where you've got the big guy hanging onto the ropes as well. I can't even remember his name as they fall down,
Uh,
and then he rockets all the way up to the top.
oh, Drago, yeah, yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah, Drago. He uses the leverage point of the other two totems to like bounce
slingshot.
off and then slingshot himself. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Um, but I think that there was like one shot in there. So because the timelines were so tight as well, we had animators already animating scenes in that before I had finished the final models for the set. So, the original layout model was just sort of like this super low poly, like block out sort of area. But then they wanted to go with this super craggy sort of rock. So I then had to, for a lot of scenes, like once we finished the final model and everything else like that, I had to go through and retrace my steps with all the animation and literally put on all the hand grips because they're like falling down or sliding down mountains or holding onto edges or anything else like that. So literally just shifting, because animation didn't have time to go back.
Yep,
So that fell on me to then reorganize that sort of stuff.
yep.
But I feel as though by going and doing that, it pays off because that scene for me is action centric. Yeah,
Yep.
I think it's probably, apart from the finale, one of the biggest action scenes in the movie.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it is because it really did set up the dynamic between the quokka and the crocodile about how their dynamic is as a pair. They're going, oh yeah, who's got dominance, who doesn't have dominance, and
Yeah,
besides being such an action-packed one where they're actually very physical and doing stuff, it's also got that psychological battle where they're going, I'm the king of this one, and you're just this weak little annoying brat, but you saved me. Got to
yeah,
save me
yeah,
at the
yeah,
end. Yeah,
yeah,
it's really a great film. I'm glad to see that it came out on DVD now.
yeah.
The last question I want to just kind of get from you about the feel of, the Sanctuary City as a whole. Do you have a favourite movie that everyone should go see? Which one do you think's actually the one that you think people should go see?
The three. I would probably say, Combat Wombat, and like purely because I think the character dynamic between Maggie and Sweetie is just so good. Um, Other than that, I also feel from a professional standpoint, I feel as though the movie is more grounded with the environments. So obviously, the Wishmas Tree was this sort of like broad, sweeping landscapes. We had a lot of area to traverse because it's a journey movie. Whereas Combat Wombat is sort of takes place in Sanctuary City itself, and the franchise is called Tales from Sanctuary City. So for me, it brought more life to the city and its inhabitants more so than say the first one or the third one, because the third one is ultimately a sports movie and you're seeing a lot of the characters and you are still seeing a bit of Sanctuary City, but it's more so the stadium, a little bit of the wilds, and but not the city itself. So I feel like number two really, I think, cements the series as a whole.
All right, Egan, thank you so much for sharing it's such a 3 year, 2.5 years of, brilliant, hard sweat work and, everything compacted into such a small period of time. But thank you for sharing your perspective on bringing these three iconic Australian movies to life.
Yeah,
Or
yeah, yeah,
iconic Brisbane movies. Yes, they all came out of Brisbane.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
So thank you so much for coming along.
No, thank you.
And to everybody in YouTube land, if you haven't checked out the Sanctuary City movies, make sure you check them out. They are now available for video on demand. You can find them on nearly every platform. So I shall have some links somewhere in the description to that. You can also contact Egan through, I think LinkedIn's probably the best way of finding him. If you want to get a hold of him and say, you've done so much, it looks wonderful, come join us on another epic adventure. But until the next time, I'll say all, bye-bye.